Hi again. In this section, let's just take a few minutes to dive a little bit deeper about what we mean by steroid hormones versus protein hormones. So for steroid hormones, what we mean is they're lipids. They are cholesterol based. As you can see, picture of cholesterol in the bottom left-hand corner, we've got some benzene rings and cholesterol. And because this is lipid based, it doesn't travel as a steroid hormone. It won't travel through the blood because blood is water based. So it needs a protein carrier. This protein carrier also helps prevent it being degraded by other enzymes in the blood. So when the steroid hormone is bound to the protein, we call it a bound hormone, and this makes it physiologically inactive. Now, once it's unbound, we call it a free hormone, and then it's able to leave the blood to then find its target and its receptors to bind to. So our steroid hormones come from three main places: the male testes, the female ovary, and in both sexes, the adrenal cortex. And in the adrenal cortex, as you'll learn later, we have three different categories of hormones being produced. In the outermost zone, we have our aldosterone being produced, which is a mineral corticoid. And then in the middle zone, we're going to have cortisol being produced, which is a glucocorticoid. And then the innermost part of the adrenal cortex is where we're going to have our sex hormones produced, specifically androstenedione. And the reason for this is this hormone can then leave the adrenal cortex and in the target organs, thinking testes and ovary and other tissues. This is where it will be converted to testosterone in the male, and in the female to our female hormones, estrogens, of which estradiol is the most common, but we can just use the word estrogen in this course, as well as we're going to have progesterone being produced. So compared to the protein hormones, steroid hormones are slower to act, and oftentimes it's days after they bind to the receptor before you see a physiological effects, but it's at least going to be hours. There is no amplification of these hormones, which will be discussed later on, and they also have a longer duration of action than the peptide hormones. So let's look at the how these induce what happens inside the cell. So shown at the upper right-hand corner of this picture, the steroid hormone in the blood has a protein carrier, and it is bound. Once it's unbound and it's free, it can then go through the plasma membrane. Its receptors are not on the plasma membrane. Its receptor is inside the cell. Now, the previous picture showed its receptor in the nucleus, but this one shows the other option in that its receptor is in the cytoplasm. So either place, either in the nucleus or the cytoplasm, is going to find a protein which is its receptor and will bind to it. Once it has bound to its receptor, if it's in the cytoplasm, then it goes through the nuclear pores to enter the nucleus, just like it would have if that's where its receptor was. Inside the nucleus, then, this hormone receptor complex then binds to DNA, and that triggers gene transcription, where we're going to take the DNA and then we're going to make complementary messenger RNA, which exits the nuclear pore to go back in the cytoplasm to bind to a transfer RNA, which is then going to trigger translation. So the whole thing about steroid hormones is that their receptors are on the inside and they have to trigger transcription and translation within that cell to have any effect. So at the end of translation, we form this long chain of amino acids, gets cut off, and essentially now you have a new protein that was made. So that's steroid hormone. So now let's look at the non-steroid hormones. First, let's define what a non-steroid hormone is, because there are several types. Comparing them, they are all water soluble, so they're easily transported in the blood. That being said, some do have protein carriers to prevent their being broken down, not because they're required for transport in the blood. Now, because the phospholipid bilayer in the cell has that inner hydrophobic area, these cannot cross the plasma membrane to enter their cells, so their receptors are on the cell surface. And when non-steroid hormones bind to the receptor, that gets linked to one of several different second messenger systems, which we will explore in the next video. There's more than one second messenger system that's involved with hormones. The net result is it binds to its receptor. We have this trigger with different events occurring, and that causes some type of change inside the cell. So looking at the types of non-steroid hormones, I know we were using the word protein loosely before, but basically there's 4 different categories. The first are called glycoproteins, which means you have a carbohydrate attached to a protein. And these are found in our male and female reproductive systems. They're going to be hormones known as follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which is the same thing as interstitial cell stimulating hormone. The second category are our derivatives of amino acids. And these include epinephrine and norepinephrine, which we've talked about previously, and it will also include our thyroid hormones. Our third category are the peptides, and what this means is we just have a short chain of amino acids. Okay? And the examples of peptide hormones, the 2 of them both come from what is known as the neural hypophysis, or the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, which we'll learn about in the non-too-distant future. And the last category of non-steroid hormones are those that are called proteins. And this includes insulin, glucagon, and growth hormones. So these are much more complicated structures with a big quaternary structure, as you can see in the drawing here. So with that, I am done discussing differences between steroid and non-steroid hormones, and I invite you to come back shortly as we start learning about second messenger systems. Thank you.